A huge shadow passed over the quiet human settlement. The villagers looked up, their hearts racing as a massive dragon flew low over their homes. Its wings were broad, cutting through the air with powerful beats. The dragon's scales were dark, almost like a storm cloud, and it had a fierce look in its eyes. It was clearly tired and hungry, but there was something else, a sense of urgency in its movements. The dragon landed in the open field just outside the village. Dust flew into the air as its claws dug into the ground, sending out vibrations that shook the earth beneath them. The ground trembled with the force of its landing. The villagers watched from a safe distance, their fear growing with every second. They had heard stories of dragons, but no one had ever seen one up close. The legends painted them as fierce, untamable beasts. Beside the massive dragon was another creature, a smaller dragon, but it looked even more worn out. This one was clearly in worse shape, its wings drooping and its body trembling from exhaustion. It was a female dragon, and she appeared to be pregnant. Her belly was swollen, but she seemed weak, barely able to stand on her own. The male dragon, though tired, stood tall. His eyes scanned the area, looking for something or someone. He had come a long way, traveling through dangerous lands. His mind was focused only on one thing: his mate's hunger. She needed food, and she needed it fast. He was prepared to do whatever it took to feed her, even if it meant asking for help from the humans. The male dragon's gaze finally landed on a human, a man standing near a fire in the middle of the settlement. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't running in fear, nor did he have a weapon raised. Instead, he simply watched the dragons, his face calm and steady. He was a foreman, known in the village for his ability to handle tough situations. His name was Arlen. The dragon's instinct told him that this human might be different. With a deep growl, he stepped toward Arlen, his eyes locked onto the humans. The foreman didn't flinch. He knew this could go either way. The dragons could attack, or they could be desperate enough to ask for help. Either way, he was ready. The dragon's voice rumbled like thunder, deep and full of power. "Human," he said, his words heavy with meaning. "My mate is hungry. We have traveled far, and she is weak. Help us." Arlen studied the dragons carefully. He saw the pain in the female's eyes, the way she swayed on her feet, as though each step was a battle. He could see the male, dragon's pride, but there was a quiet desperation behind it. This was no ordinary plea for help. The foreman took a moment before answering, considering the risk. Dragons were not known for their kindness. They were creatures of power, not often willing to trust others. "We'll help," Arlen said simply, his voice calm but firm. "But you must trust us. We'll give her what she needs." The male dragon let out a low growl, still unsure. He didn't fully trust humans, but the desperation in his mate's eyes pushed him to agree. "We will wait," he said, his voice filled with tension. Arlen nodded. He turned and signaled to his crew, who were standing nearby, watching the scene unfold. They had seen dragons before, only from a distance. The foreman quickly began to work, pulling together what little he had. He knew the dragons needed something special, something that would give the pregnant female the energy to survive. While the foreman worked, the male dragon stayed by his mate, his eyes never leaving. The female dragon's hunger was growing worse, her body trembling. She looked at the foreman with a mix of curiosity and distrust. It was clear she wasn't sure if this human could really help her, but she had no choice but to wait. The male dragon watched as Arlen mixed ingredients and worked quickly. He wasn't sure what this human was doing, but there was something in the way he moved, confident, calm, and focused. The dragon's instincts told him that this man was different from others he had met, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if it was a mistake to trust him. Finally, the foreman turned and faced the dragons. He had prepared something simple but full of nutrients, a blend of foods that could restore the dragon's strength. He held out the food carefully, almost reverently. "Here," Arlen said. "This should help." The male dragon took a step forward, still wary. But his mate's hunger was stronger than his pride. Slowly, he let her take the food from the Foreman. She sniffed it first, then took a small bite. The moment the food touched her tongue, something changed. The female dragon's body seemed to relax. Her eyes, which had been dull and tired, now sparked with life. Her body began to regain strength, and she stood taller, her trembling limbs growing steadier. The male dragon's eyes widened in surprise. This human, this simple man, had done what no one else could. He had given his mate the strength she needed. The Foreman watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction, knowing he had done something important. He hadn't just fed a dragon, he had saved it. The male dragon finally turned his gaze to Arlen, his eyes no longer filled with doubt. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft but full of respect. It was the first time he had spoken the words, but it wouldn't be the last. As the days passed, the male dragon watched the human Foreman closely. He had never seen a human do what Arlen had done. The Foreman had fed his mate, and now she was recovering quickly. Her strength was returning, and she no longer swayed on her feet. But the male dragon still couldn't understand how such a small creature could have such power. It confused him. Every time Arlen moved, the dragon followed him with his sharp eyes. The Foreman worked with his crew to repair tools, build shelters, and organize supplies. But it wasn't just the work that caught the dragon's attention. It was how the human carried himself. Calm, focused, and confident. The dragon had seen many strong creatures in his life, but this human was different. His strength wasn't physical, yet there was something about him that made the dragon uneasy. The female dragon, now resting and much stronger, often looked at Arlen with soft eyes, as if she was beginning to trust him. But the male dragon was not ready to let his guard down. He had been taught his whole life that dragons were the strongest. Humans were weak, fragile, and unworthy of their respect. The idea that a human could help his mate, let alone give her the strength to stand, felt unnatural. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the village, the male dragon approached Arlen. He had been silent for days, watching from a distance, but something inside him told him it was time to speak. "You did not kill her," the dragon said, his voice low and filled with suspicion. "You did not take advantage of her weakness. Why?" Arlen didn't seem surprised by the question. He paused for a moment, looking at the dragon with steady eyes. "Because she needed help," Arlen said simply. "I saw that. I could tell. You both were in trouble. I've worked with animals before, and I know what it means when they're hurting. I just did what I could to help her." The male dragon stared at him, his glowing eyes narrowing. "And you expect no reward, no payment?" he asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "You expect nothing in return?" Arlen shook his head slowly. "I don't do things for reward," he said. "I do them because it's the right thing to do." The dragon let out a rumbling growl, his pride rising. He had heard humans say similar things before, but he had never believed them. To him, everything had a price. Everything had a cost. He was not used to seeing kindness for kindness's sake. "You trust too easily," the dragon said. "You do not understand what it means to have power." Arlen smiled softly, a small chuckle escaping his lips. "I understand power, but I also understand that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is help someone without expecting anything in return." The dragon looked away, his mind racing. He was starting to see the human's words differently. Maybe there was more to this human than he had thought, but it didn't make sense. Dragons were powerful creatures. They didn't need help. They survived on their own. Humans, in his eyes, were not meant to be allies. They were meant to be tools, servants, nothing more. Meanwhile, the female dragon, who had been listening quietly from a distance, stood up. She was no longer weak. The food the human had given her had done more than restore her strength. It had restored her faith in something she hadn't even known she had lost. Trust. She walked over to Arlen, her movements more graceful than before, and nuzzled his side, gently. The foreman smiled and placed a hand on her scaly hide, his fingers lightly brushing against her warm body. The male dragon watched, his heart tightening in his chest. He didn't understand it, but something inside him felt uneasy. The female dragon looked up at Arlen with gratitude in her eyes. She trusted him, and somehow, that made the male dragon feel even more uncertain. "Why do you protect us?" the male dragon asked, his voice quieter now, almost as if he was asking himself the question rather than Arlen. Arlen turned to face him, his gaze steady and kind. "Because I believe in doing what's right," he said. "You've been hurt, and now you're healing. I don't expect anything in return, but I do hope that maybe you'll see that humans can be trusted." The dragon remained silent. His mind conflicted. He had always been taught to see humans as beneath him, but the foreman's words were starting to make sense. What if humans weren't as weak as he had thought? What if they were more than just a species to be ignored or feared? The male dragon looked at his mate, who was now resting peacefully. He saw the trust in her eyes, the bond that was growing between her and Arlen. And for the first time, he wondered if he had been wrong about humans all along. The sun was rising, casting its soft light over the village. The air was still and calm, with only the sound of birds calling from the trees. In the small settlement, things were quieter than usual. The villagers had grown used to the presence of the dragons, though they still kept their distance. The dragons, in return, had settled near the human homes, no longer looking like the fierce, untamable beasts they had once seemed to be. The male dragon stood nearby, watching his mate as she rested. She had been weak and sick, but now she was better. The food the human had given her had worked. She was stronger. She no longer trembled. The male dragon could see the change in her. She was even starting to look healthier, her scales shining again. The male dragon's thoughts, however, were still clouded with doubt. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just food. How could something so simple have helped her? He still didn't understand it. How could a human, someone so small and fragile, know what a dragon needed? Arlen walked over to where the dragons were resting. He was holding a basket, the smell of fresh food coming from it. The male dragon stood tall, his eyes following the foreman as he approached. "I've made something for her," Arlen said, his voice calm and friendly. He held out the basket, but the male dragon didn't move. The male dragon's eyes narrowed as he looked at the food. "This is not enough," he said. His voice was deep and strong, filled with the pride of his kind. "You cannot feed us like this." Arlen didn't flinch. "I understand you think it's not enough," he said. "But this is something I've made with care. Your mate needs something simple to help her regain her strength. I'm not offering riches or grand feasts, just something that will help." The male dragon growled low, his pride still bruised. He wasn't used to accepting help, especially from a human. He believed dragons should fend for themselves. Yet, the way his mate had looked after eating the first meal, the way she had gotten stronger, made him wonder. Maybe, just maybe, the human knew something he didn't. He stepped forward, slowly, carefully. He sniffed the food in the basket. There was something sweet in the air, something that made his stomach rumble. It wasn't the usual meat he craved, but it smelled good. The female dragon, who had been resting beside him, lifted her head and looked at the basket. Her eyes softened as she saw the food. She could feel the change in her body, the strength returning. She turned to her mate and nudged him gently, encouraging him to try. The male dragon hesitated. His pride was still strong, but seeing the way his mate looked at him, he realized that it wasn't just about food. It was about trust. She trusted this human, and perhaps it was time he did too. With a deep breath, he lowered his head and took a bite. It was unlike anything he had ever tasted. It was warm, soft, and rich with flavors he couldn't name. It wasn't the raw meat he was used to, but it felt like it had the power to heal, to give strength. His mind was flooded with new thoughts, thoughts he had never considered before. As he chewed, the male dragon felt the strength beginning to return to his body. He could feel the power slowly filling his limbs. It wasn't the same kind of strength as his natural might, but it was enough. It was more than he had expected. The female dragon watched him, her eyes wide with surprise. She had believed in the human's food from the start. Now, she saw her mate changing before her eyes. The male dragon finished the meal, his body relaxing as the energy filled him. He looked at Arlen, who was standing a little ways off, watching carefully. You were right, the dragon said, his voice softer now, less proud. This food has power. Arlen smiled, his face filled with quiet satisfaction. I knew it would help, he said. I'm glad it did. For the first time, the male dragon felt a deep sense of gratitude toward the human. He had come to them in their moment of need, not expecting anything in return. He had given them what they needed to survive. The dragon realized then that not all humans were weak. Some had strength in ways that were different, but just as important. Female dragon nuzzled Arlen's side once more, this time with even more affection. She was fully recovered now, her body strong and vibrant again. The male dragon watched her, and for the first time, he didn't feel jealousy or anger. He felt something else. Respect. Thank you, the male dragon said quietly, bowing his head slightly. It wasn't much, but it was the first time he had ever shown such respect to a human. Arlen simply nodded. You're welcome. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its warm light over the village, something had changed. The bond between the dragons and the humans had started to form, not through fear or force, but through something much more powerful. Trust. The bond between the human and the dragons was growing stronger. Arlen had continued to help, offering food, shelter, and care. The dragons, especially the male, were starting to understand something new. Humans weren't weak. They weren't just creatures to be feared or ignored. They were capable of kindness, of understanding, and they were strong in ways the dragons had never considered. But despite this new understanding, the male dragon was still uncertain. He still didn't fully trust the humans. The idea that a human could be stronger than a dragon, not in body, but in spirit, was a difficult thought to accept. One afternoon, as Arlen and the dragons rested under the shade of a large tree, a loud noise broke the calm. The male dragon's head shot up, his ears twitching at the sound. He immediately stood, his body tense, his muscles ready to react. The ground began to tremble. It wasn't just a light shake. It was strong, powerful, as if something heavy was moving through the earth. The male dragon growled low in his throat, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. Something was coming, something dangerous. Arlen stood quickly, looking around. He knew that this wasn't the time for fear. He had learned to trust the dragons, and now it was his turn to prove that he was just as strong, just as brave. What is it? Arlen asked, his voice steady, though a part of him felt nervous. He could see the worry in the male dragon's eyes. The dragon's wings lifted slightly, ready to take flight. There is something coming, he said. Something big. We must prepare. Arlen nodded. I'll gather the villagers. You and your mate can stay close to the village. We'll be ready. The male dragon's eyes narrowed. He wasn't sure if he should trust the humans to be ready, but he had no choice. He had learned that sometimes trusting others was the only way to survive. Together, they moved quickly. Arlen ran toward the village, shouting for the villagers to gather. The male dragon and his mate followed close behind. The female dragon's wings flapped gently, her body now fully healed and strong. She was ready to fight if needed. As the villagers hurried to prepare, Arlen and the dragons watched from a distance. The rumbling sound grew louder, and soon, a massive creature emerged from the forest. It was a huge beast, its dark fur matted with dirt, its eyes glowing with hunger. It was a wild predator, one that had been terrorizing nearby villages for weeks. The villagers had heard of it, but had never seen it this close. The male dragon stepped forward, his wings spreading wide, his muscles tensed, ready to defend the village and his mate. He wasn't sure if the humans could help, but he was ready to do whatever it took. "Stay back," the male dragon said, his voice booming. "This is our fight." But Arlen didn't move. He stayed calm, watching the creature carefully. "We'll fight together," he said. "We've been working together, and we can win together." The male dragon looked at him, his eyes filled with uncertainty. He had never fought alongside a human before, but something in Arlen's voice told him this human wasn't afraid, he was ready. The dragon could feel the strength in the foreman. Maybe this time it was worth trusting him. The creature charged, its massive form barreling toward the village. The male dragon let out a loud roar, a deep sound that shook the ground. He launched himself into the air, his wings beating powerfully, as he dove toward the beast. The female dragon followed, her sharp claws ready to strike. Arlen stood back, watching the battle unfold. His heart raced, but he didn't flinch. The dragons fought with fierce power, their movements quick and precise. They tore into the creature with claws and teeth, each blow filled with the power of years of survival. The villagers, guided by Arlen, used weapons to support the dragons, throwing stones and using long spears to keep the beast distracted. Together, they formed a solid defense. It wasn't just the dragons who fought. The humans were right there beside them, doing everything they could to help. The battle was fierce, but in the end, the combined strength of the dragons and the humans was too much for the beast. The creature let out a final, desperate roar before it collapsed, defeated. The male dragon landed heavily on the ground, breathing heavily. He looked at Arlen, his eyes filled with a new understanding. The humans had not only helped, they had fought alongside them, standing strong and fearless. The dragon had never expected this. Arlen approached the dragon, his face calm but tired. "We did it," he said simply. The male dragon nodded slowly, his respect for the human growing. "You are strong," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Stronger than I thought." Arlen smiled, the sweat on his forehead glistening in the sunlight. "Together, we are." For the first time, the male dragon fully understood. It wasn't about the size or strength of a creature's body. It was about the strength of their heart, their spirit. And together, humans and dragons had proven that they could be stronger than anything that came their way. After the battle, with the massive creature, the village was quieter. The air felt lighter, and the tension that had once hung over the settlement was now gone. The humans and dragons had won together, proving that they were a stronger team than anyone had expected. The male dragon, who had once been so full of doubt and pride, now looked at the humans with new eyes. He had seen their bravery, their strength, and their ability to stand by them in the face of danger. Arlen stood near the edge of the village, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the warmth of the day was slowly fading. His thoughts were still on the battle, but a feeling of peace had settled in his chest. The dragons had fought by his side, and together they had protected the village. It was a victory, not just for the humans, but for both species. The male dragon approached him, his heavy footsteps barely making a sound on the ground. He looked at Arlen, his eyes filled with something the foreman had not seen before: respect. "You were right," the dragon said, his voice softer than it had ever been. "We are stronger together." Arlen turned to look at the dragon. "I knew we could do it," he said with a small smile. "We just had to believe in each other." The dragon nodded, his large wings folding neatly behind him. "I did not understand humans," he admitted. "I thought we were the strongest, that we could survive alone. But I see now that it is not strength alone that makes one strong. It is the willingness to trust, to work together. Arlen's smile grew. Exactly. Strength isn't just about muscles. It's about heart, about standing together no matter what. The dragon lowered his head, a sign of respect. You have taught me this. For a long moment, they stood there, the sounds of the village settling around them. The villagers were rebuilding, repairing the damage done by the creature, but there was no fear in their movements. They knew they were safe now. They had faced a great danger, but they had overcome it, and they had done it together. The female dragon joined them, her wings flapping gently as she landed beside her mate. She nuzzled Arlen, a soft sound escaping her lips. The foreman reached out and gently patted her, his hand warm against her cool scales. The male dragon glanced at his mate, his eyes softening. She is stronger now, he said. Thanks to you. Arlen nodded. I'm glad I could help, but it was all of us together. You and your mate are just as important. The dragon looked at him for a moment before responding. Perhaps, he said slowly, we all have our own strengths, but it is only when we share them that we become truly powerful. Arlen felt a warmth in his chest at the dragon's words. He knew that this was the beginning of something new, something important. The dragons had come to the village as strangers, as creatures to be feared. But now, they were allies, friends. Together, they could protect their home. Together, they could face anything that came their way. We've come a long way, Arlen said, looking at the dragon. But this is just the start. There's still a lot to learn from each other. The dragon's eyes glinted with something like hope. Then we will learn, he said. As night fell, the village began to settle down. The sounds of the day faded away, replaced by the quiet chirps of insects and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. The dragons and humans stood together, side by side. It was a peaceful night, and for the first time in a long while, everyone felt safe. Arlen looked at the stars, their light twinkling in the dark sky above. He thought about how far they had come. The dragons had once been enemies, creatures to be feared and avoided, but now they were something more. They were allies, partners in a shared struggle, and together they had become something stronger than they could ever be alone. The male dragon's deep voice broke the silence. Tomorrow, we will go to the mountains. There are others like us, there. We will show them what we have learned here. Arlen turned to the dragon, his heart swelling with pride. Then let's go, together. And as the night settled in, the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter. A new chapter had begun, not just for Arlen or the dragons, but for all of them. They were no longer just humans and dragons. They were allies, and together, they would face whatever challenges the future held. The morning sun rose slowly, casting long shadows over the village. The air was still cool, a gentle breeze sweeping through the trees. Arlen stood at the edge of the village, his eyes looking toward the distant mountains. Today, they would leave. Today, they would venture into the mountains to meet others like the dragons, other creatures who might need help, and who might offer their own strength in return. The male dragon was standing nearby, his wings folded neatly at his sides. He looked calm, but Arlen could see the thoughts racing in the dragon's eyes. This was a big step. Leaving the village, venturing into the unknown, was a challenge for them all. The dragons had never trusted anyone outside their own kind, and now they were about to meet more creatures who could either be allies or threats. We're ready, Arlen said, turning to the dragon. The male dragon nodded. I will lead the way, he said, his voice deep and steady. But you must stay close. The journey will be long, and we do not know what we may find. Arlen agreed. I'll stay close. We've come this far together, and I trust you. With awe, a final glance at the village, they began their journey. The female dragon followed behind, her wings tucked against her body, her eyes scanning the surroundings. She was alert, ready for anything. The villagers had given them supplies for the journey: water, food, and basic tools. But the dragons knew they would rely on their strength to survive. As they moved farther from the village, the terrain began to change. The land grew rougher, with tall grasses giving way to rocky paths and jagged cliffs. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks hidden by thick clouds. It was a harsh, wild place, but the dragons were used to such environments. It was where they came from, where they felt most at home. The journey was not easy. The path was steep and the weather changed quickly, from warm sun to sudden cold winds. But the dragons kept moving forward, their powerful bodies carrying them through the rough terrain. Arlen, though tired, kept pace with them, his determination not faltering. They were a team now, and he wasn't about to fall behind. As the hours passed, the group reached a higher point in the mountains. The air was thin, and the wind howled louder, but the dragons moved with ease, their eyes sharp, their wings ready to lift them if needed. Arlen, however, was struggling to keep up. His breaths were shallow, and his legs felt heavy from the climb. The male dragon noticed. He slowed his pace and turned to look at Arlen. "You are tired," he observed. Arlen nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice betrayed the exhaustion he felt. "Just a little worn out." Without a word, the male dragon lowered himself to the ground. "Ride on my back," he said. "It will be faster." Arlen hesitated. He had never ridden a dragon before, and it seemed like an impossible task. But there was no time to waste. He climbed onto the dragon's back, gripping the scales tightly as the dragon stood up again. At first, Arlen felt uneasy, his heart racing as the dragon began to move. But soon, he felt the steady rhythm of the dragon's steps, and his nerves began to settle. The ride was smooth, and despite the height and the rough terrain, Arlen felt a sense of safety. The dragon was powerful, and he trusted the creature beneath him. The female dragon flew ahead, scouting the path, her sharp eyes searching for any signs of danger. The male dragon kept a steady pace, his wings stretched out slightly to help balance the weight of Arlen on his back. The journey was still long, but the bond between them was stronger than ever. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow across the mountain range, they reached a small plateau. The dragons stopped, their eyes scanning the area. It was quiet, peaceful even. The wind had died down, and the air was cooler now, a welcome change after the heat of the day. The male dragon turned to Arlen, his voice filled with quiet pride. "We have made it this far." Arlen nodded, his body tired, but his spirit high. "We have, and we'll keep going, together." The journey to the mountains wasn't just a physical one. It was a journey of trust, of understanding. Arlen had learned to trust the dragons, and they had learned to trust him. But there was still much to be done, much to discover. They were no longer just strangers. They were partners, facing the unknown as one. The moon began to rise over the mountains, casting a soft light on the rocky path ahead. They would rest for the night, but tomorrow they would continue their journey. The road ahead was uncertain, but Arlen knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened, they would face it together. The next morning, the journey through the mountains took a different turn. The winds had picked up again, stronger than before, howling through the jagged peaks like a wild beast. Arlen, still riding on the male dragon's back, felt the cold wind biting at his face. But he held on, determined to keep moving. They had come so far, and there was no turning back now. The dragons moved with confidence, their wings unfurled slightly to help them glide across the rough terrain. The female dragon led the way, her sharp eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, looking for any sign of danger. The male dragon followed closely behind, keeping a steady pace, his body tense. Something was wrong. He could feel it. The air had grown heavier, and the usually bright sky was now clouded over. A thick fog began to creep along the mountain path, swirling around them like a living thing. Arlen frowned. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice barely reaching the dragon over the sound of the wind. The male dragon's head turned slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the fog. "It's not natural," he said, his voice low and tense. "We are not alone." Arlen's heart began to race. "What do you mean? What's out here?" Before the dragon could answer, a loud growl echoed through the fog. It was deep, rumbling, and sent chills down Arlen's spine. The sound was followed by the heavy thud of footsteps. Arlen's grip tightened on the dragon's scales. Whatever it was big, and it was coming for them. The female dragon let out a sharp cry, her wings flapping as she darted toward the sound. The male dragon immediately followed, his wings beating the air in powerful strokes. Arlen felt the wind picking up, rushing around him as they soared through the fog. The growl grew louder, and suddenly a massive figure emerged from the mist. It was another creature, but this one was different. It was larger than the beasts they had encountered before, with black scales that shimmered like oil and eyes that glowed red like fire. Its long, sharp claws scraped against the rocky ground as it moved toward them, its fangs bared in a snarl. The male dragon landed in front of Arlen, his wings spreading wide. "Stay back," he growled, his voice low but firm. "This is my fight." But Arlen wasn't afraid. He knew the dragons were strong, but this new creature was unlike anything they had faced. "We fight together," he said, his voice steady. The male dragon turned to look at him, his eyes narrowing in surprise. "You would risk yourself for us?" Arlen nodded. "We've come this far together. We'll face whatever comes next, together." The creature lunged at them, its claws extended, its jaws snapping. The female dragon swooped down, her powerful claws slashing at the creature's side. The male dragon followed, his body a blur of movement as he attacked with his teeth and tail. Arlen watched the battle unfold, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never seen anything like this. The dragons were magnificent, their strength and speed unmatched. But the creature was powerful too, its massive form crashing into the ground as it fought back. Arlen knew they couldn't do this alone. He glanced around, searching for anything that might help. That's when he saw it. A large rock, sharp-edged and heavy. It wasn't much, but it was something. Without thinking, Arlen grabbed the rock and hurled it at the creature. The rock struck the creature in the side, causing it to stumble. The male dragon took advantage of the moment, leaping forward and sinking his claws deep into the creature's flesh. The female dragon followed, biting down hard on its neck. The creature roared in pain, thrashing violently. But it was too late. With one final effort, the male dragon twisted his claws, and the creature collapsed, defeated. Arlen jumped off the dragon's back, panting, his heart still racing. He had never been in a battle like that before, but he had fought alongside the dragons, and together they had won. The male dragon stood over the creature, his chest heaving with exhaustion. "You helped us," he said, his voice filled with surprise. "I did not expect this." Arlen smiled, wiping the sweat from his brow. "We're a team. We help each other." The female dragon nudged Arlen, her eyes soft with gratitude. He reached out, placing a hand gently on her scales. The bond between them was stronger than ever. The fog began to clear, and the sun broke through the clouds. The path ahead was now visible, but the dragons knew this wasn't the end. There would be more challenges, more dangers ahead, but as long as they had each other, they were ready to face anything. Arlen climbed back onto the male dragon's back. "Let's keep going," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We have a long way to go." The male dragon nodded, his eyes fierce. Yes, together, and with that, they continued their journey, stronger than ever, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side.